Good afternoon. Thank you for all taking time out from your lunch hour. Really appreciate you all coming to join us. And I'm very excited to have such a strong panel. We have a really, really interesting mix of people who've been making instant games and most importantly, seeing success making instant games, which is why you should all listen to what they have to say. So without further ado, I want to introduce everyone and then we'll get into the heart of the matter. So why don't we just start with Andrew on my left, and I'd love to hear a little bit about you, games you're building, company you work for, who some may have heard of, and then we'll pass that kit. Andrew and Andrew. We're gonna go Andrew R and Andrew G to try to keep it.
Yeah, that's, thank you. Thank you for having me. It obviously will be a little confusing because we have two Andrews, so I'm Rose Green. I work for Zynga, which many of you have probably heard of. We're a fairly sizable mobile and web developer and publisher. I work specifically on Boggle with Friends, Crossword with Friends, and what brings me here is Words with Friends Instant. So we were one of the first developers on the platform. We continue to be one of the largest developers on the platform, continue to have a significant team and a number of resources dedicated to building Words with Friends. And specifically, I'm the director of product.
Hi, I'm Ankit Jain. I work with a company called Moonfrog. We're based out of Bangalore, primarily focused on mobile games, and so far we've seen a lot of success in the Indian subcontinent. But lately with instant games, we're seeing a good lot of user base in the Western markets.
Hi, my name is Bin Jong-son, and I'm from Korea, and I work as a business development manager of Sunday Toast, which is based on South Korea. Mainly Sunday Toast focus on developing app games, and especially casual mobile games like Match 3 Puzzle, Match 2 Puzzle, as well as board game. And we recently started our challenge to create HTML5 games, and so far we launched 5 titles with instant games, and so now I'm here. And thank you for this opportunity.
Hi, I'm Andrew Green. I'm co-founder and COO of Knock Knock. Started about a year ago. My co-founder, another Andrew, Andrew Friday, he was actually at Zynga working on Messenger games, and he got in touch with me after I was at TinyCo in Jam City, and we had a lot of ideas around bringing some of the kind of building IPs and simulation type games. How can we make those social on a platform that was so frictionless and viral? We just got really excited about that and started diving in right away.
Great. So some of you have alluded to it a little bit already, and but just keen to hear kind of why did you start making games? I know with Zynga, we worked with you from really the very beginning. Sunday Toast as well came to the platform quite early, whereas Moonfrog and Knock Knock, by definition, have come slightly later. So curious just to get a sense. You mentioned it. Maybe Andrew, we'll start with you because you were already alluding to it. Sort of what differentiates the platform? What made you think, hey, we should maybe try this out?
Yeah, I mean, when Andrew came and showed me his perspective on the platform and how it works, I didn't know anything about it. I'd been making mobile native games for 7 years, like Quest for Stuff and Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery. And all of a sudden, he's showing me games that load instantly and that you kind of can leverage gameplay mechanics that show up in people's kind of daily messaging lives. And when you look at a lot of the other nascent markets or building and growing markets out there, like AR or VR or blockchain games, I couldn't see the adoption curve for that. And here I'm looking at like hundreds of millions of retained customers that are playing these games and enjoying them. And I'm like, wow, we've got these amazing customers and we've got new gameplay dynamics. I want to build IP in that world. And that's what got me excited and started going there. And we've only learned, like every day is like an amazing learning opportunity.
And you should say, how long have you guys been building games for on these games? It's pretty, you're the newest of the group.
A year.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've been building games for Instant for a year now. And I mean, it's just been a wild ride. And we've had success already. We've learned a ton already. And we're really ambitious about how to leverage a lot of those, a lot of the amazing features that Facebook's built for the platform that really do allow you to create some new gameplay dynamics that I don't think you could ever do on native.
Cool. I mean, you've been building, Sunday Toast has been building games again since really the early days, but you've seen success with different genres lately. What brought you to the platform initially?
Before starting with this, I like to introduce, explain you about the history of Sunday Toast, how it started and how we made our success. And Sunday Toast started its own business with working closely with Korea's local messenger app, Kakao platform. Maybe some of you guys have heard about Kakao platform, which is the most dominant chat app in Korean market, and more than 90% of the mobile users are using and having the app with their devices. So we launched our first match 3 puzzle games, which integrated with this mobile platform in 2012, and which is boomed up instantly and very explosively. Players send their messages for friends, asking for lives like the Zynga and other King games, and that's what we learned so far. Still now, we have 10 gaming titles integrated with Kakao Messenger, and which brings in one of the biggest casual gaming user pools with Sunday Toast in Korean market. So we learned and we understand how crucially the Messenger app is working with the gaming business. And we were quite dominant in Korean market, and we want to find a way to go global. And we heard of HTML5 and the Messenger platform of Facebook starts its gaming business, and we thought this is our new opportunity. When tech arrives and the market opens, this is the big chance for business. So that's how we started to work with Facebook, and we didn't have any doubts that Facebook will be and is the greatest option for us. So that's how we started here. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, I have to say you're one of the partners we didn't know necessarily before, and you grew organically. So what brought you to the platform? Did you just see other people having success, or what was the catalyst? Because again, you built a very nice business in the mobile app world, and what caused you to kind of take that leap?
So at Moonfrog, we have always been excited about new platforms, and just a little bit, like we have a lot of us at Moonfrog have a little bit of Zynga history, so we have seen the massive reach of the Facebook platform. So we was always interested in working on that in some form of fashion. The other bit was instant game being inherently social, which is another area of interest that we have, and the whole idea that you can play with friends and not have to worry about whether the friends have that game installed or not. Like everybody, if he's in your messenger, practically has your game. That was very interesting. Also combined with this being a new platform and trying to get early advantage, early learnings into that platform and get early traction, and then hopefully reap the rewards later.
Great, and you may have heard there's more Zynga DNA. So to Andrew, Ara, I mean, Zynga, again, we've worked very closely together over the years, the two companies, clearly. And we came to you, I guess, early on with the proposition. I mean, it was still, I think, we were still very excited when you decided to invest as early as you did. In terms of some of the context around thinking, again, beyond the success you'd had in the mobile app world?
Yeah, it actually started off as a hackathon project, so I can't say
Very
Zynga
Facebook,
was
yeah.
Foreseeing the future, if you will. So obviously instant games came out of a hackathon project, and then at Zynga itself, it was a hackathon project. We have some of the Zynga folks in the audience sort of who spearheaded that. But sort of if you take it back a layer, I think sort of the DNA of Zynga and the DNA of Facebook and why that actually worked is sort of that underlying belief that games are better with friends. And you sort of think about those times you're at home, sitting around the table, playing with friends and family. The game is at the center of that, and the conversation is on the game, the conversation is on sort of life in general, and the same thing applies to instant games. This is an opportunity in the virtual space to put the game back into the conversation and to enable and amplify those conversations. So Words with Friends was just a natural fit for that. Because it is inherently connective. It has sort of a lot of retention. I saw someone in the audience earlier and talked to them saying they were playing their wife. So it was a perfect mechanic to put on the platform because you're putting it in this sort of intimate conversational setting and going back to the roots of sort of what games mean.
Great, thank you. I was going to ask you which genres you've seen success with, but we know, and I think to be totally clear, when we first started looking at instant games and we started thinking exactly about that construct of people playing with their friends, the first games we thought of, and one of the first games was Word with Friends, because it just fits so naturally in that conversation. And I think, all of us have probably had the discussion with our sister, mother, uncle, whoever it is, that's how they keep in touch with friends, is through Words with Friends, rather than actually having to talk to people you can chat within the game. So we just sort of flipped it on its head and said, well, you're already chatting, you can play the game inside the chat as opposed to the chat in the game. Anyway, I'll go to you because you have a different genre of game you've seen success with. Did you know, Ludo Club, for those who know, it's a hugely popular game in India. Yeah. Sorry is a game, I think it's a big North American game, definitely big in Canada. Did you know, how did you bet on that game? Again, because you have a portfolio of games, why did you think this is the game that might work?
Yeah, so when we started looking at instant games as a platform, we had a few hypotheses. First was we were internally looking at more casual side of the spectrum, but we still had a few experiments. So we launched a Ludo game. We also launched a Teen Pati game on the platform, which is more of a localized version of poker in a sense. And what we saw was that the casual game did better on the platform. Also, what we saw was games that have interaction, or as in Ludo Club, as we kept on adding features that allowed people to interact with each other within the game, with their friends and things like that, their retention spiked with those experiments. So that sort of helped us tune our hypothesis around instant games.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is your game has been one of the games that succeeded as a real-time multiplayer, and it's a longer play session. Is there, we'll get into best practice, but is there anything, did you think differently? Because I know we thought it right away that the turn-based format would work, but we were less sure about whether having to have more people together simultaneously would work, but I mean.
Yeah, so for us, it was more of our Moonfrog competencies in that area. So we sort of brought that competency into the platform, and we were lucky that it worked for us.
Oh, thank you. So you've had a bunch of different genres on the platform as an early adopter, but your most recent title, one of your bigger titles, is the slots title, which is very different.
Yes.
How did you come to that? I mean, just because again, I think this is one of the interesting questions: is what genres work? What can other people learn?
Yeah, that's true. We tried several different genres of the games with instant games, but strangely, it is the only survivor is the slot game, which naming as Slotmate. Sorry, and according to Instant Intel, Slotmate is the #1 rank of slot category of instant games, and I don't know. We used to have some board games similar to gambling, but in Korean style, and we have some developers who wants to develop the casino genre or challenge for slot genre, and that's how we started our slot games. But this is the only game which passed over our internal KPI cutoff for surviving. And in my view, the unique things of Slotmate is the high LTV, and which is based on the high big share of in-app purchase of the total revenue. In Slotmate, in-app purchase share is more than 70% of its total revenue, which is said to be quite unique in instant games, because most of the games on the instant games make their revenue with ad monetization. So, and of course, this is slot genre, and players can have a more stronger spending power, and they're eager for spending money on the game. And we put some social features features to drive their monetization needs, like putting in real-time competition in all the 50 different theme of the slot games, and as well as we added a club, like a guild system in other app games, and we encourage them to compete each other personally and with their community. And after we updating these two features with the game, and the monetization numbers doubled up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think that's what I think for those in the audience, which is so interesting. And we keep obviously learning as developers keep innovating, but what we've seen with SlotMate is, again, a genre that's very traditionally thought of as, high monetization, not particularly social in some ways, has with adaptation has worked. And we've also seen single player match 3 progression games, like a Cookie Crush or others, again, with adaptation can really work. So it's nice to see, as we go forward, more and more genres are succeeding. So Andrew, over to you, last but not least. You guys have taken, a slightly different format and as your first game and have seen success.
Yeah, we started with, small kind of idle, merge idle game that had, seen success on iOS. It was a bit of a fast follow, but we were also trying to just be like, what art would work globally? What's a concept that would work globally? You have to think globally when you think about these games. You can't think from like, in mobile native, it was always a very like Western first mentality. We're gonna make all of our money from 5 English speaking markets, and then we're gonna try to localize and scale in eFigs, and then really disregard Asia. But here it's like you have to think about how are you gonna serve a global audience. So we took a very simple game, but then we said, how are we gonna serve a global audience? We made sure our localization was like fantastic, that the art style was good, and that the sharing mechanics were actually motivating and fun, and that they had some reward to the gameplay loop, and added some very basic like sharing functionality that was inherent to making the loop work better for you. And out of nowhere, we went from like 1,500 DAU to 400,000 DAU, and it happened like super fast. And we were like, "Oh my God, what are we?" We got to build retention features fast. And like, and by the time we started speccing those retention features, we were already losing users. But interestingly, we constantly get influxes from new markets that just out of nowhere will shoot up like another, over a week, like 600,000 players. And it's just like, you're like, okay. So I think it's big learning for us is what does your MVP look like versus how fast can you build features, and how do you think about how you support a title versus when do you move on from a title, or how long should you be like, okay, we know we're gonna launch this, we're gonna stick with this for 6 months regardless, because if we just get the, if we believe in the game and we get the kind of ingredients right, we're gonna see some, real balance between virality, monetization, and retention, and that's really what you're trying to figure out. Our next games are definitely just like much bigger bets. We're just making bigger games, and our MVPs are much richer, that just more feature rich, more virality out of the gate. We just don't want to be caught again in that way, where if it like takes off, I want to have a lot more retention baked in. Yeah, we're really excited about also some innovations that we're doing on the kind of just like the frictionless side, like taking advantage of just the lack of friction, and how social can work differently on this platform in a very bold way that I don't know if it's going to work out at all, but I'm pretty excited about it. But that first game that we did definitely taught us so much. And I think starting small, if you're a smaller developer, I think starting small is actually a fine place to start, and then learn. And I think you'll learn pretty fast because there's a lot of very clear insights that you can get. That's definitely what happened with us on Car Match Hollywood, for sure.
Great, thank you. So the last thing I want to touch on, you've already thankfully segued into it for us, was the notion of best practice. Like what have you learned so far? I think you certainly touched on a bunch of ones around, thinking about social, potential to scale. Any other tips and tricks? Again, I think you've covered a bunch of really useful points. Anything else to think about that for people who are either building or thinking about building games?
Yeah, I mean, I think that finding something that you believe in from a fun perspective, fun first, and like fast fun, something that feels fun fast, that you already maybe know or see or have thought of, and that when you're playing that simple basic mechanic up front, that you're like addicted to it and that you love it, but that it can extend socially or it can extend from a retention perspective. But basically, I feel like what you're kind of doing in a sense on this platform is you're taking casual and hyper casual games and you're literally turning them into these, you're adding all of these social hooks and retention hooks that look way different than mobile native, play different than mobile native, and you have to experiment on those fast. So it's just like this like fast experimentation cycle of feature development with, as long as you've got a light onboard, like almost no onboard, and like a lot of fun up front, I think you're starting in the right place. But then the real path making and trailblazing is up to that next, how do you do the social? How do you build for thinking about India, Taiwan, other markets that are not markets that you've been in or maybe where you don't know the player as much, but that the base fun is it's agnostic to geography.
Great, thank you. Anything to add? And I think you touched on a few themes, but love to hear if there's anything else you want to share with the group, what you've learned so far.
I will recommend to design monetization mechanic for in-app purchase, which can give you guys high LTV. And I agree with his point. And this is messenger app of Facebook. And as you well know, players are playing their games with messenger app and share their achievements on their timeline. I think this is a really crucial point because it can make a real massive tipping point for virality. And if you don't have enough UA campaign budget, I think this is the only way or biggest opportunity for all of us to get massive, save our UA costs.
Great, thank you. Okay, over to you.
So most of the things have been covered, but I'll just reiterate some of our learnings again. Social is super important on the platform, more so than what we have seen in apps before, even though it's important everywhere. Every time we were able to unlock some way of social interaction within the game or remove friction from people playing with their friends, we saw retention boost as well as engagement increase. The other important thing was because of the nature of the tech of being HTML5 and the fact that it's a new platform, we were able to iterate pretty quickly. And then this incrementally designing small experiments, just figuring out what does this audience like on this platform, what really works. It was very exciting. And I think that's another thing that led us to where we are today. In terms of other tips, it would be once the game is successful, it's truly a global distribution platform. For example, we were focused on the Indian subcontinent and we saw users coming out of Peru, Poland, and we were not really prepared for it at that time, right? So just be prepared to support people in languages that you may not be aware of and cultures that you may not have designed for. That was a very interesting thing. And at least for us, the learning was so far we had been focused on IAP monetization model, and instant game is when we realized that actually ad monetization for us has been doing really well, right? IAP hasn't really caught up in our games to that level. So there've been a lot of interesting learnings around ad monetization.
Great, thank you. And we'll finish with Zynga. Andrew, the game that started it all, or close to started it all.
I mean, I echo a lot of what has been said, but I'll add sort of two extra things. One of the things, common mistakes that I see happen a lot, or common conversations I've had is, hey, I'm just going to port something from the native app environment. Oh, I'm just going to take it over there. And that is purely a recipe for failure. And that sort of bleeds into my second point, which is this is a different platform. And that's sort of echoes that tried and true concept of medium is the message. This is a different medium. You need to think about how that medium is interfacing and changing expectations on your players and thinking through that sort of holistically, because if you think it's a straight port, if you think it's the same mechanics that are going to work, you are not going to succeed. And that sort of leads into saying retention first. You need to have a fun, fast game. You need to keep players in the system. But again, on that sort of medium is the message. It's not retention on a single user level. We actually look at retention on a conversational level, saying how do we keep two people together and sort of building their career and their gameplay together. Because again, it's a conversation, it's messenger. So that's sort of the switch from what you might see from traditional retention mechanisms that you think through in the native app environment.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. Very much appreciate it. Super insightful. Appreciate your investment in the platform, the time you spent coming here today, and for sharing your thoughts. So let's give them a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So thanks everyone for coming out. I hope that was really helpful, and you heard obviously some of the best practices from some of our developers who've been working on this platform for a while. My name is Chris. I'm a partner engineer at Facebook, and that means that I work with instant game developers, potentially such as yourselves, to build great instant games. It's still a new and evolving platform. It's been around for just over 2 years, but I'm going to try and share some of the learnings that we've had during that time. Every time you start an instant game, a new life begins. It's born, it loads, it's played, and then you finish playing and it dies. And behind, it leaves some custom updates or shares so that other players can find it and start that cycle all over again. So today I'm going to walk through this cycle and add some concrete advice along the way. The birth of an instant game happens when it's loading. And like the birth of a new relationship, the player hasn't yet decided how much effort they're going to give it. But unlike a real relationship, there really isn't a such thing as too fast. You do, however, want to make sure you load at least the bare minimum so that when the loading is done, the player is left with a satisfactory experience. You can stream a lot of the content in after the player has actually loaded the game for the first time. There's no point in loading the sprite for the sword they unlock at level 57 or the audio from the final boss fight at the start of the game. Loading is really expensive. During the first 12 seconds of your game loading, you will lose an average of 4% of players per second. In the first 3 seconds, you can lose up to a quarter of your potential audience. Getting the player into the game as fast as you possibly can should be your priority. It's also important to set expectations. Instant Games provides the set progress function for you to report loading progress back to the user. Although if you don't use this function, we actually just randomize the progress bar anyway, because we have found that it's way better to look at something than nothing at all. Once the game has loaded everything it needs, it's time to get started. But when an instant game is starting up, it's really important to consider the context in which it was launched. When a game starts up, it always starts in a context. This context might be a solo context with a single player playing from a surface like the Games tab or Search. And if someone is playing by themselves, they might just want to be left to it. But once they sort of get familiarity with your game, they might want to invite a friend. And when they invite a friend, that friend is going to enter in a social context. You can see on the thread context on the right side of the slide here, when you enter the game, you just want to get straight into the action. There's also some other stranger context types. Link contexts provide a simple URL that resolves to the same context ID. Link contexts can be used to create those sort of I/O type games with large numbers of players via a single URL. And you can also detect which context someone is in, so you can actually use these links to reward players, for example, for coming from a particular promotion. Do I use this instead? I'm assuming I use this instead. Instant games run on many different platforms, from iOS to Android to Portal to the web, and your game might behave slightly differently on all those platforms. That's why we provide get-supported APIs to tell you what you can use without having to worry about exactly where you're played. When you start a game, on a device that supports in-app purchases, for example, you want to spend those first few seconds checking to see if there are any purchase failures from the last session. It really sucks if you buy something and then don't get it in the game. So this is really important, and it ensures if there's a crash previously that the user is still able to receive those items. Ad-based monetization is a really important component of instant games. And the Instant Games SDK allows you to preload up to 3 ads that you can show the user. Select these strategically. We highly recommend using, say, rewarded videos that the user is going to want to get into straight away. After all that loading and initialization, it's time for your player to enjoy the game. You can reduce that upfront loading cost that I mentioned earlier by streaming assets in as they're required. But you don't have to be obvious about it. You don't have to show another loading screen. I particularly love this implementation from Everwing, which is actually so good that it allows you to play the game while you're offline. And then once you reconnect, it loads in the boss you're about to fight. Custom updates are the breadcrumbs left behind from every gameplay session. These are critical for re-engagement and retention. You can provide custom updates that are localized, so they show up in the correct language for the user. Users message in their native languages, and they expect their games to message in their native languages as well. These updates will show up in Messenger, in the threads with the people who are playing them, but they'll also show up in Facebook and on your gaming tab. Instant games have no way of knowing when they're at the end of their life, so you should always make sure to save progress as you go. If you're using the inbuilt player data API that we provide, we'll actually handle retries for you and make sure that that data gets persisted even if the game is quit. But if you're using your own backend, then you'll need to make sure you're handling that sort of retry logic yourself. There's nothing worse than coming back into a game and finding out your progress is gone, so this is really, really important. Facebook Analytics allows you to analyze data for your games. In addition to basic metrics, you can slice your data by platform events, such as where the player comes from. And soon we're enabling this, you can use it in conjunction with our A/B testing, so you can check based on versions which users are performing better. You can also compare multiple segments of your audience and convert a segment into a custom audience for retargeting via user acquisition ads. So that was a lot, and it was pretty fast, so let's recap. When an instant game is loading, make sure to load the smallest set of assets you possibly can. You check the locale. We're working on new features that will give you access to the locale while you're loading, and so you can only load localized resources. Right now, you get access to localization just after the loading phase of the game. Finally, report progress so the player knows how long they're expecting to wait. When a game is starting up, think about the context. Where is the player coming from? What did they just click? Instant games don't just have a single home screen icon. They are uniquely contextual. Check for any unconsumed in-app purchases, provided that makes sense. Not all in-app purchases are consumed, and that's fine. But this is important in case an unclean exit messes something up. And preload ads, especially rewarded videos that player is going to want immediate access to. When the player is playing, make sure you're only using supported APIs. Load progressively, but if you can, make it stealthy so the user doesn't feel like they're waiting for something. Always localize your custom updates. Even if you don't localize the content of the game, the updates that appear in chat are really important. If you don't localize your custom updates, we will actually pre-fill localized content for you because we know that localized content performs better than non-localized content. Finally, save as you go. You don't know when someone's going to get a phone call or have the sudden urge to take a selfie. So as long as you're constantly saving their data, everything will be okay. Finally, you should measure everything so that you can understand your users and understand the impact of your changes. I've actually uploaded all of these slides, along with some code samples and some additional commentary, to fb.gg/IG lifecycle. So you can head over there, check it out, and digest this a little more slowly, and perhaps while you're creating your game and you're actually thinking about this stuff. Thank you very much.